This is Tim Elmore from Growing Leaders, and we're going to take a few minutes and talk about parenting styles. This is a much searched for topic, and I thought it would be good to review some of the most popular parenting styles over the last couple of decades and then look at some of the newest ones that I'm seeing today. I believe that we not only have a new generation of kids on our hands today, ones that we're calling Generation Z, we have a whole new generation of parents. This has been 3 or 4 decades in the making. It started in the 80s when several things happened that just caused us to be absolutely, sometimes paranoid about the safety of our kids and the self-esteem of our kids. But along the way, we developed some styles, all well-intentioned, but some that did some damage. In fact, if you don't mind, let me give you right now in review 4 of the most common parenting styles that actually do some damage. Now, if you're listening to this right now, you've read the blog that I posted where I talk about the snowplow parent, the karaoke parent, the dry cleaner parent, and the volcano parent. Let me very quickly describe why each of these are damaging. Maybe you can do some self-evaluation, and then I'm going to bring you right up to date on what I think I'm seeing on the horizon in all 50 states that we get to talk to parents and teachers. So let's talk for just a minute about the snowplow parent. This one is a derivative of the helicopter parent, which we started reading about in 2002. But the snowplow parent is basically the one who pushes and negotiates and sometimes even intimidates and manipulates others to ensure that the doors are open for their children and that they have no negative incident that affects their self-esteem. Somehow I think there's a narrative in our mind today that our report card as parents is to give our children every single advantage possible. And while this sounds good, you and I both know that's not the world they're going to be graduating into as adults, where somebody's going to be lobbying for them and pushing for them and negotiating for them. So while this is natural for us when our children are younger, we need to stop doing this. I'm going to suggest the problem is these kinds of parents don't allow their kids the privilege of learning to fail, struggle, persevere because we're opening doors so often for them. And the issue, I think, for us as parents, if we do this style, is we sometimes just flat out struggle with being out of control. We might even be control freaks. And we find it difficult to trust others to deal with items like teachers or coaches or violin instructors or whatever. And we just feel like we need to be intrusive and micromanaging in order to make sure our kids get all the breaks. I mentioned also then the karaoke parent. Now you know what karaoke is, right? Okay, that's where we go down to that little bar and grill and we sing like Elvis or Neil Diamond or whatever. The karaoke parent is the one who wants to look and sound like their kids. They want to dress like their child, talk like their child, be cool like their child. In fact, I think sometimes they want to be a pal rather than a parent. This happens especially as our kids move into middle school, high school, and college, where we want so much to cling to that closeness we felt when they were younger. Of course, the problem here is these kinds of parents don't provide their kids with clear parameters that build self-security and self-esteem. It's almost done out of our own need as parents. And that, of course, is the issue. If you look at your screens, frequently these parents and teachers become karaoke in our style because of our own emotional insecurities. We may have an extremely high IQ, but kind of a low EQ. And our need is just so great that we tend to parent out of our need rather than out of our health. These parents have a very difficult time going through a day or a week where their child doesn't like them because a rule was leveled or some discipline had to be leveled. And we cave because we're in need of our children to like us. The third type of parenting style is the dry cleaner parent. Now, you know what this means to take your dry cleaning down to the dry cleaners, right? You may have put a stain on your shirt or blouse, and you take it down to the dry cleaner and you say, hey, I've messed my shirt up. Can you clean it and press it and get it back to me on Friday? I need you to fix my shirt. These are the parents who don't feel equipped to raise their kids, and so they drop them off for experts to fix them. Either the school, the coach, the youth pastor, you name it, but we're the Cub Scout master, but we're somehow dropping our kids off somewhere else. And sometimes even delegating our role as parents and authorities and the ultimate mentors in our kids' lives. Very quickly, the problem here is the dry cleaner parents don't furnish their kids with the mentoring, the authentic face-to-face time they require. In fact, I noticed in my generation, sometimes these parents would not only take them down to some expert, if you will, we'd throw money at them. We thought we could just buy solutions to the problems with a new iPhone or iPad or new set of clothes or something, because we didn't quite know how to lead them well in the home. We didn't know how to have a bad day. The issue, if I can just be blunt, this is a little tough, but I want you to follow with me. For some of these dry cleaner parents or teachers, connecting with kids is just not our specialty. We feel inadequate. We feel like this is not our identity. I've watched some parents say, I'm better with younger kids, but not teenagers. Some say, I'm much better with teenagers, not when they're toddlers. But we tend to acquiesce our responsibility to be there with them face to face, just loving them and listening to them sometimes. So because we don't see it as part of identity, we want to delegate it. Now, this fourth style that I mentioned in the blog is the volcano parent. Just like a volcano, sometimes the smallest triggers can cause us to just absolutely explode in the principal's office or the teacher, with a teacher in the classroom at a PTA meeting or whatever. But these parents can burst into a rage like the Incredible Hulk, if I may, if they're backed into a corner. And once again, this often has more to do with our stuff than our kids' stuff. We've got the problem. So if I can summarize the problem here, these parents have unrealized dreams from our past, sometimes an unhealthy past. In fact, sometimes I think the issue is we are living out our unlived life through our children because we didn't get to play third base for the Boston Red Sox. By God, we want our son to play third base for the Boston Red Sox, or we want our daughter to be the ballerina or whatever. Now, there's nothing wrong with those vocations, but I think we need to do a check, a health check. Are we emotionally healthy, or are we exploding at the smallest of triggers because something's going on inside of us and we're not providing a healthy role model for anyone around us, much less our children? Now, my point in sharing this brief video is I believe as I travel around and just meet with marvelous parents across the country in all 50 states and even around the world, I am seeing a new style of parent on the horizon. I think you can see them on Little League fields. You can see them at extracurricular activities like theater and sports and again, violin, karate, you name it. But we've got our kids in places to give them a boost. But I'm finding because of the complexities of the day we live in, there is a new kind of style that I'm going to talk to you about, and then I'm going to give you the anecdote for. But believe it or not, we are welcoming a brand new generation of kids. We've been talking about the millennial generation for some 15 to 17 years now. But worldwide, social scientists are now measuring this new population of kids, what we're calling Generation Z. They got that title, Gen Z, because they follow Generation Y, the millennials, but they're the newest kids. They're the kids that are still students today. Millennials are now young adults, but these Gen Z kids are growing up in an entirely different world than the one I did. Think just for a moment about most of these Gen Z kids don't remember a day without social media. There were social media apps that were part of their growing up years. In fact, 90% of preschool kids have been online. So this is just part of the nature and the makeup of a new generation of kids, more so than the millennials. In fact, I'd say it this way. The millennials grew up with a cell phone, which changed our lives. Generation Z is growing up with a smartphone, which has transformed our lives. Generation Z learns about the September 11th, 2001 terrorist attacks as a story from history. It's not unlike JFK's assassination or Nixon's Watergate scandals or whatever. It's just, it's part of the history books. And they have experienced the days since September 11th, which has given us more than 26,000 other terrorist attacks around the globe. Somewhere in the world, someone's getting blown up almost every day, either here in the States or somewhere around the world. They don't need adults to get information. You probably have heard me say this before, but how odd is this that children today are growing up in a world where they don't need a parent or a teacher to get information? In fact, when I speak to students, they're looking down at their phones, and often I got to realize they're fact checking me, okay? So just know this is a new world. They don't need us for information, but for interpretation. Here's another one. Did you know, and probably this is the most disconcerting fact about Generation Z for me, these kids today experience the same level of anxiety as a psychiatric patient did in the 1950s. By the time they reach middle school and high school, their angst levels are so high. And sometimes you might think, good grief, they've got things, it's nicer than ever now. Everything's a quick click, we got on-demand shows, we got smartphones, but some of the anxiety is because of that smart technology. I don't know that our brains were designed to take in 10,000 messages a day. And then on top of that, there are standardized tests. They're always in angst over being tested once again, much more than I was when I was a kid. So just know the anxiety levels of children today are very, very, very high. And then finally, this is interesting to me, they intuitively recognize today's new realities better and faster than their parents do. In other words, we are quickly moving into a world, thanks to innovation, thanks to new realities that have popped up so rapidly, that young people are recognizing where the world is going faster than we do. And that can give us a sense of angst because sometimes we feel like we're antiquated as we look at the world. And that is, of course, is what leads to this new parenting style that I'm seeing almost everywhere I go. I want us to take a look at this real quick. As crazy and silly as it may sound, I want you to think with me now about the ostrich parent. Now, you know that an ostrich has a legend built around it. The ostrich is this famous bird with a long neck that's famous for putting its head in the sand, seemingly to blind itself from seeing perhaps the harsh realities around it. Now, of course, this is a legend, but it's still been cited in books and history. Scripture verses even talk about the ostrich hiding its head in the sand. So real quick, let me compare this to this new parenting style today. Look at the screen with me, if you will. Today, I believe, too many parents simply don't have the time or the patience to understand the realities their teens are experiencing. And too often, we disengage from even trying to do so. There's just too many apps out there, simply leveling the rules their parents gave to them as a child, and forgetting the fact that life is very different than it was, at least when I was a kid. Now, that's not to say there's not timeless virtues we want to build in kids, like patience and gentleness and so forth, but today the world is just fundamentally different, and the way I think we instill these skill sets are going to need to be different. And like an ostrich, we can stick our head in the sand and miss things. We fail to be intentional as we lead our kids. It's just, get them into bed at a decent hour, and then we can have our own life back. Real quick, let me give you an illustration of this. One of our team members, Andrew McPeak, hosted some focus groups just a couple of years ago. We were wanting to get the pulse of Generation Z. And one of the statements that came from these young teenagers over and over and over again, without question, in every single focus group was this: my parents have no idea what my life is like. And then they added, especially after I go to bed. In other words, we tuck them in or we say goodnight and we think that we've shut the door and they're falling asleep, but they're on social media for hours after that, maybe on YouTube, maybe they're texting or sexting or doing something that we have no idea about. But these kids while they love their parents, they're absolutely certain that their parents have no idea what their life is like. That sounds like an ostrich to me. So very rapidly, I want to jump in to going deeper here and offer what I think the problem and the issue is for this kind of parenting style. In fact, I'd like you to do some self-evaluation as you listen to me. The problem, of course, with the ostrich parent is this. The kids are pretty much left to navigate this new world of anxiety and social media without a guide. We may be physically in the house at night, but boy, we may not be with them emotionally. In fact, another reality came from our focus groups that actually brought tears to my eyes. There were many of these young students, teenagers, middle schoolers, high schoolers, that said, I never talk to my mom. She's on Facebook all afternoon. Even when she's cooking in the kitchen, she's looking at her phone. I never really get to talk to her. And it was almost like it was a request. Would you tell my mom? I actually want to talk to her. Now, you and I both know sometimes teenagers don't know how to ask for that. In fact, they won't ask for that. But there is a great need for adolescents to have engagement with their parents. Your kids will always need you while they live under your roof. How they need you may differ. In other words, they need you at different ways at 7 and 8 years old than they do at 17 and 18 years old, but they still need you. So here's the issue as I see it for this ostrich parent. Many of these parents are simply preoccupied with our own lives, with their own lives. Many homes are either single parent homes or double income homes where parents are just consumed with making a living rather than molding a life. And if I can just be blunt with you, while I know life can be difficult, I'm working somewhere between 50 and 60 hours a week as an empty nester now, but I know it's easy to get consumed with other things besides the children that are under our roofs at home. It's understandable. But while the issue may be the adults don't know enough about the current teen culture, the sad truth is sometimes we're even too afraid and too busy to ask. I am making a request of you to consider that you jump back in, that if we become an ostrich parent, take our heads out of the sand and say, I'm going to find out what's going on, not to be a police officer in the house, but to just know. I've got to at least know what's going on so I can be an effective and wise guide in the home. So here's the big $64,000 question. What's the remedy to the ostrich parent? Certainly it's what I just said, knowing what's going on, but what are some practical steps we can take? Well, if you don't mind, I'm going to be a little cheesy here for a moment. Since I chose the ostrich parent, a bird, to describe a parenting style, I'm going to choose another bird for the solution, the anecdote, if you will. I believe that adults who are parents, adults who are teachers, adults who are coaches, anyone who is working with kids usually fall into one of two camps. We are the ostrich that I just talked to you about, or we can become the owl. And I pause here only to get you to think. I know this is really cliche here, but are you more like an ostrich, not knowing, or are you more like an owl? Now, very quickly, let me give you what I consider to be the description of the owl parent. If you know anything about owls in the wild, you know that the owl symbolizes a completely different approach to life than an ostrich did. First of all, the owl is most alert at night when danger lurks. They're best when it's dark. Number two, the owl can rotate its head 360 degrees to see any movement occurring. Now, I'm not asking for you to make a literal interpretation of that, but are we seeing all angles and all sides to what's going on in our kids' lives? Next, because it's always on watch, the owl has developed an acute hearing and keen eyesight, even in the dark, perhaps especially in the dark. So we're especially good when things are hard. A fourth truth, owls are actually nocturnal and are known for their distinct calls to other birds and species. They're the warning signals for others. And that doesn't mean we become paranoid about our children. It just means we're the ones that are seeing and knowing enough for other ostriches out there that need help. And then lastly, most of all, owls have become symbols of wisdom and nobility. I think more than at any time in my lifetime, and perhaps more than at any time in the last century, wisdom in parenting is needed today. Let me give you an illustration of what I mean. I am a baby boomer, so I grew up in the 1960s. Television was the new technology that was making its way into the living rooms of homes across my country, and your country probably. That was the new technology, and there were many people that were very afraid of televisions. What was going to seep into the home? These terrible, rotten TV shows like I Love Lucy and Andy Griffith and Gomer Pyle and so forth. But I mean, I'm smiling now because we know, oh my gosh, those shows were so nice. You know, they were so, and they almost always taught morals and virtues in the shows. Today, television is fundamentally different, but I'll be honest with you. Now there are more screens than the TV screen, and we have reason to be more alert. Now it's not just the TV that's seeping into our home. the very phones in our hands, the very tablets in our hands, the video game screens on our television sets or computers, all represent information that may be bad or good, safe or dangerous. Sometimes we have no idea what's coming into the minds of our kids, and I'm simply suggesting, would this not be a great enough reason to become an owl rather than an ostrich with our kids? So let's talk for just a minute. I want to give you some questions to pose to yourself that will help you respond to this question I have on the screen. Which are you, an owl or an ostrich? Okay? So real quick, let me give you some ostrich questions, all right? Number one, do you have a tendency to hide from bad news or dangerous trends, not wanting to face reality? Now, of course, the cliche answer is, of course not, but watch yourself for about a week. I found myself when my kids were in middle school, I just didn't want to keep up with all that. And so I probably was hiding from bad news, or at least didn't want to face what was going on in their lives right then. Secondly, do you, quote, bury your head in the sand, end quote, wanting to escape the necessary changes we must make to prepare kids for the future? The job market will be different. A middle school or high school kid may get a job that doesn't even exist today. Question three, do you hide behind noise and clutter? In other words, you've got your own social media fix going on in the kitchen or your room or the living room or whatever, and you're too busy because you created noise and clutter meaning you don't even need to face the realities that your children are bringing to you. And do you get lost in routines, hoping to merely survive each school year? In other words, we're such creatures of habit, we build these routines and we're not even quite sure how do we face this new stuff coming at us. Now, when you look at those 4 questions, I want you just to ask yourself, if any of them describe you, are you willing to face the fact that you might be an ostrich parent? Now, let me give you some owl questions for just a minute. Again, I'm totally aware how cheesy this sounds, but I just want to give you some owl questions for a moment. Do you do your best work in the dark? Are you alert and observing what's happening all around you in culture? Might you even watch MTV or VH1 or even some of the shows your kids are tuned into on Netflix just because you want to know? Not because you like them, because you just want to know what kind of input's going into the minds of your children. Do you possess the wisdom to address dangerous patterns in kids, helping them to rise above addictive behavior, risk aversion, self-absorption, anxiety, depression, and entitlement? By the way, I chose those words very carefully. These are all symptomatic of a new generation of kid. Certainly not every teenager is addicted to something, but a growing number, perhaps the majority, are addicted to something. And the kids are readily admitting this to us in focus groups. I'm addicted to my phone. I'm addicted to this. I'm addicted to television shows. I'm addicted to cigarettes. I'm addicted to vaping. There are all kinds of habits that we might not even be aware of. Risk aversion. We have kids that want to be entrepreneurs, but according to our data, this is the most risk-averse set of young adults since we've measured kids. Self-absorption. This is a selfie generation. And that doesn't mean they're evil kids. It just means they're into themselves and may not see the big picture that they're about to graduate into as they enter adult life. Anxiety and depression, huge issues. This is the most anxious generation of teenagers that we've ever measured. And by the way, can I say it again? If you look at the rise in anxiety among teens today, it directly parallels the rise in social media. I just don't think it's a coincidence. And then, of course, the sense of entitlement that we all tend to feel. We are entitled to perks and breaks just because we're here. So let me close this video by just talking about why we need owls. Again, as cliche as this may sound, we must be owls standing watch in our culture. Let me give you some steps I think we need to take that I think are very practical and doable for you this week. 1, stay alert in the dark, just like an owl does, and in dangerous times. Keep current, as I've already encouraged you to do, on cultural statistics, media outlets, and music. In fact, I don't mean to sound wrong here, but I do a blog 3 times a week that's on these issues. How to lead this next generation well. It's always research-based, and we can send it right to your email inbox. Or if you don't want to get it every day during the week, you can get it on Saturday and get a digest of all 3 entries. But I'm writing on this kind of stuff to keep you current on cultural stats, media outlets, and music. Number 2, monitor your kids' social media accounts. Now, this is a big debate in our homes across this country, but because some kids are going, "Mom, this is a private account. Why you don't have any right to look at my social media accounts? This is me. This is for me." And while I agree, privacy is a right that every American has. If you've purchased the phone for them, and if they're a minor that perhaps isn't fully developed, in fact, can I take the word perhaps out of the sentence? Their brain isn't fully developed until they're 25 years old. They need someone just to be a guard. Not a god, but a guard on their social media accounts. So you should know, and there are apps you can purchase to watch their social media accounts. By the way, I did a blog on that. You can look it up. I've got all kinds of accounts you can look at to monitor social media accounts. 3, I would suggest you do something that I did with my kids. Plan weekly date nights or weekend dates where you spend one-on-one time with them. Not to interrogate them, but just to keep earning your right to listen and speak into their lives. I found that as I took Bethany, my daughter, out, and Jonathan, my son, out, even if it was just to get a burrito for an hour, I could listen in, and just through their conversation, their vocabulary, it would let me know what was on their mind. I would even ask my kids, "What's your biggest temptation as a middle school student?" And I got wild answers. My daughter said it was to cuss. I mean, that was her biggest temptation. And so that was helping me, But I want to encourage you, take time, if you don't already, to have just dates. Date your spouse, date your kids, but keep earning your right to, by listening, keep earning your right to be heard when it's your turn to speak. Number 4, observe patterns, diagnose trends in your kids' behavior. Are they anxious or aloof? Do you see signs of anxiousness or just being aloof? Sometimes one signal of depression is they socially withdraw and don't seem to care, but that can be a signal for something that's going on inside of them. Now, let me give you a few more. The next one, establish nightly phone curfews. I don't know how old your kids are, but we found it was just wise to say by 10 o'clock or 9 o'clock or whatever is appropriate for your age kids to just have a curfew. Throw your phones in a basket at mealtime and curfew time. And that doesn't mean you're not savvy to technology. It just means you're going to have time where you're unplugging and you're talking face to face. Or maybe there's bedtime where you're actually getting with your kids and listening again. But just believe it's important to turn our mobile devices off after hours and be real people face to face with each other. Here's another one. When you buy them a new phone, if indeed that's what you do in your home, have them sign a phone contract with boundaries. This is another article I posted on my blog page. I suggest you have a phone contract that's not mean or rude. Again, you're not an officer in the Army. You're just saying, because I bought this for you, it's my phone. But I'm going to let you use this phone. Here are the parameters. And you just lay them out. If you want to look it up, you can go to our blog site at growingleaders.com and punch the blog tab and just look up phone contracts. And again, I know I'm being redundant here just a touch, but I want to underscore this one. Schedule plenty of face-to-face social activities to foster relationship skills. Because teenagers today are really screenagers. They're just better on the screen than they are face-to-face very often. Make sure that your kids are getting face-to-face time where they're not only good on screens for their job in the future, they're good with soft skills like face-to-face conversations, listening, being on a team, interacting well, conflict resolution. These are all things that employers are begging for. And I believe it's up to us as parents and teachers to foster face-to-face social activities by making sure they're happening in our homes and kids are getting good at doing relationships. And then stay in touch with your colleagues, communicating what needs to be done. This might mean you listen or speak, but I just think it's good for teachers, parents, coaches, youth workers, you name it, mentors, to be in touch with each other, just sharing what's going on, sharing tips with each other, and making sure that you're all up to date with what's happening. So, as I conclude, let me just say this. I believe good leadership today, in this day and age, needs to be both timely and timeless. Perhaps you've heard me use this term before, but this summarizes it best for me. I need to be timely. That means I'm staying current on what's happening in my kids' lives, in culture today, the job market that they're going to graduate into. And yet at the same time, I need to be timeless, meaning I understand the timeless skills and virtues and values they're going to need whatever day they graduate into. I have said recently to college students, as an employer, I will always hire honest employees over dishonest ones, every time. I'll always hire disciplined employees over undisciplined ones. I don't care what day you're living in, 1940 or 2040, honesty and discipline are going to be great virtues. So we need to make sure we're passing on timeless virtues as well as being timely in our leadership of our kids. Now, I hope that I know I've rushed through this, but I'm hoping this has been helpful to you. I've got an action step for you. Apart from being timely and timeless and doing those steps I've just given to you as an individual, I want to encourage you. I'm loving these kinds of conversations around the country in schools, in communities, churches, you name it. And so I just want to encourage you, host a parenting workshop in your community. I am willing to come out. We have a whole team of speakers at Growing Leaders that will do workshops like these where we really get to interact with each other about these relevant topics. So if this seems like something your community could use, your school could use, chat with the powers that be, have a conversation, but just know Growing Leaders has been set up to be resources to you as you raise your kids, as you teach your kids, and as you coach your kids. It has been my pleasure to be with these few minutes. I hope it's been helpful. Go lead your kids well, and may we turn out a generation of fantastic leaders that will lead us into the future.